Hello, Tennessee Voices viewers and listeners. This is David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. I'm glad to have as my guest today, Teresa J.W. Bailey, who is a Senior Wealth Strategist and Director of Development at Waddell Associates. Teresa, how are you doing today?
Great, David. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so glad to have you, and I'm glad that you wrote this piece that was recently published by the Tennessean, How to Navigate the Changing Financial Landscape for Women, where you talk about some of the many issues that come about historically, money being a tool for emotional outcome in many of the conversations, and also the history of how for a long time women didn't have a voice in their finances. You provide some really practical advice for how to change that narrative. So thank you so much again. Could you talk a little bit about what motivated you to write this particular piece?
Oh my goodness. I think for me, it's been my experience coming into this industry and forming my own voice along the way. And in that process, I've realized that there really has been, a lack of a space for the more, those of us that are more nurturers, which I like to refer to as those with more feminine energy. We, like to have conversations, we like to collaborate, and we're builders more than we are producers. And so as I've evolved in my career, I've decided to maybe be a little bit louder about creating a space for, mostly women, but men as well, who, want to talk about things related to money other than beating the market and picking stocks.
Well, excellent. I appreciate that very much, because when we talk about issues of finding one's place, there are a lot of conversations about who's at the table. And one of the things that I've talked to past guests of the Tennessee Voices podcast, especially those who've been involved in empowering women, is the effect of COVID on women in the workforce and women in being able to direct their financial future. Could you talk a little bit about what you have seen over the last couple of years? What are some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges?
Oh, it's shocking to hear last few years, but I guess it has been. We've been dealing with this now. I think this has provided everyone an opportunity to slow down and really think about what they want. And that includes women, and whether we want to focus on our careers during this time, or we want to focus on our families, and really how this time has challenged everyone, both financially and emotionally. And really how to better align resources, which could be very, very scarce in this time period for families, but better align resources with health and well-being of a household. So I've seen the conversation change dramatically about, some women choosing to focus more on work because they need to produce income, and others choosing to pull back. So it's really been a wonderful opportunity to change the conversation from what it's traditionally been.
One of the things too, and I will have the link to your op-ed within the podcast notes, is that you talk about a legal term called coverture, which is where women lack a legal identity and the husband's identity covers the household. This is obviously an older legal framework, but could you talk a little bit about that and how that has affected women's ability to earn and grow wealth?
Yes, it's fascinating really to dig into. And what's remarkable is there isn't a lot of research in the area. So I'm just now sort of digging in and really taking a look at it. But at the start of our nation, we really were in that old English coverture law, where a woman was covered either under her father or her husband legally, and we really weren't allowed to own property. So lack of ownership meant lack of voice. And now, it's been just decades ago that we've been allowed, to have our own bank accounts or credit cards. So in this short period of time, we've, taken hold of our right to these things. And now over the next decade, we stand to control the majority of the wealth in the country. So in a very short period of time, we've gone from not having any voice to suddenly we will have the majority voice and decision. And so it's very, very important for us right now to understand more about money, because we're going to hold it and we'll have to know how to use it.
And what are the things that you find are perhaps some of the challenges for to women to take advantage of these opportunities to come. You addressed them a little bit in the op-ed, but I wanted you to elaborate on those, please.
Yeah, I think that for a long, long time, there were many more problems with we didn't have access to the information. Obviously, with the internet and now social media, we have more access than ever to the information. And so, and I really picked up on this in my work with female business owners. I work with executives and entrepreneurs, and many of them are women. They're the women that I'm referring to have scaled and built and grown amazing businesses. So they must know how to deal with money because they're generating revenue and investing and growing a business. However, when it came to talking about their balance sheets, there was a pivot or a lot of times a block suddenly that came up in the conversation. And I would hear the same thing, oh, I'm not good with money, which was fascinating to me for women who had multi-million-dollar businesses because it was so obvious that they were. And so one of the things that I've really been paying attention to is I think it's in here at this point. I think that we have more and more access to the information, but perhaps it happens in school where we shy away from math as a strong suit sometimes because that's the boys are better at math is what we hear. And then at some point in our life, we believe that money and managing finances is a math test. And really it's not, it's strategic thinking. And the women I know and have been blessed to be around are very good at strategic thinking. We can juggle many things at one time. So I really do think at this point now it's bringing more of a collaborative conversation into conversations about money, and it's less about access.
You're making me think of some other conversations I've had that have focused on this term that has been called imposter syndrome about, when you don't see yourself represented at the table, let's say, you are not going to be as comfortable perhaps in completely embracing this role as being there, making those decisions. And is this something that you encounter, yourself or with your clients itself? And how do you overcome those feelings?
Oh my goodness. So there's so much I could say about this. Very, very early in my career, I was a part of the CFP board's initiative to bring women into the industry, which we only represent 15% of all the financial services industry of advice giving roles. And for every mentee that I had, there's a book on imposter syndrome for women that I used to have because I do believe it's one of the most important things that we can overcome is, and for those who aren't familiar, imposter syndrome is even if you're a rock star at what you do, secretly inside you hear this little voice that says you're an imposter, you're not good at it at all. And so I see it not only in employees that I'm recruiting, I see it in entrepreneurs, both men and women who are growing businesses. And at any moment, they're pretty sure somebody's going to find out they have no idea what they're doing and their business is going to fail. And I think the same goes for women when money conversations come up. If you turn it on financial channels like CNBC, you see all this confusing letters and colors and numbers, and you write a storyline in your head that you're not good at that. You don't understand it. But the truth is that women make decisions around money all day long, and they're very good at it. So I think, David, to your point, uncovering that in these conversations is extremely important.
Well, thank you so much. We've come to the point of the conversation where I always like to ask guests about what they've been doing to cope during this time of COVID, even though we're over 2 years since the emergence of it and things seem to be heading in the right direction, hopefully. One of the things that I've noted around the leaders that I've spoken to over these last couple of years is that sometimes they don't always do the best job of taking care of themselves because they're taking care of other people. So what are you doing for your own wellness? What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you doing just to keep yourself healthy and well?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of being home more is that opportunity to sort of self-care, as they say. And for me, it's been, there is a cutoff time when I'm at home where I stop working and I transition into family life. And I go, I have a wonderful neighborhood that I live in. My daughter and I take a walk all the time. And, long baths, all the self-care things. So it's been a point actually where I've started to write more content about the importance of self-care. So for all the terrible things that this time brought us, I think focusing on the health of self has been one of the positive things.
And tell me a little bit about your own background. How did you enter into this field and what keeps you going?
I landed in this field really by chance. I started off undecided major, started with computers, a couple classes in, realized that that was not my thing. And then I went to the art school and realized I have zero talent. I thought I'd be an interior designer, not so much. And then really came back to the business school, came from a family of entrepreneurs and people in business. And money seemed to be a really smart place to go where no matter what I did, I could figure out how to apply it. So I was a corporate finance major. And then right out of college, I joined with a local advisor and realized that working with people about their money was really the best fit for me. So I've been doing this ever since.
When people ask your advice about how to think about, you talked about thinking strategically. How do you apply those lessons, in a practical basis? If you're someone who wants to get into a finance field, how do you develop those skills to think strategically, think critically, so that you can be successful in this field?
Strategic thinking in wealth management shows up in so many different forms. There really is a place for artistic individuals. I myself, my strengths lie in communication. And so I use charts to tell stories. And so I'm in client meetings thinking strategically about, okay, I've produced an analysis that says they need to do this, but I also know that this might make them uncomfortable because of their risk tolerance. So what storyline can I craft with these reports that will help them be more comfortable making smart decisions? And some of the other strategic thinking applications are, if you're really good in building relationships, I'm working with my clients' accountants who speak a certain language and my clients' estate planning attorneys who speak a certain language. And so I'm strategically pulling in all of these different relationships to make smart decisions across the entire balance sheet, not just the investment portfolio.
That's great to hear. I think especially as people decide what careers to go into themselves, I know that I have a business background in addition to journalism, and I thought at first that the math was going to kill me. But in fact, when thinking about math and these applications, whether it was statistics or whether it was really trying to understand how to solve a problem if you have scarcity in a way, I think my economics professor, first economics professor, once said that Mick Jagger was the brightest economist in the world because of, you can't always get what you want. That song was the epitome of scarcity right there.
Yes.
But, what is your advice, especially to young people, and especially younger women who may be intimidated because they've been sent these messages about, math is hard. I remember that silly Barbie situation where it was very discouraging. I can imagine.
It really was. And what's interesting about my storyline is my mother was a math teacher. She passed away when I was very young. But the story in my head that I was told was my mother was very good at math. Later on in my life, I learned from a family member that she was actually very challenged in math, and she became a math teacher so that she could help other individuals that were also challenged in math. My math sort of progression through life was I was not an A+ math student. It wasn't until later on, really in college, where the strategic application of math, I started to really jump ahead of the pack. So for me, I've even had a really cool aptitude test done by the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation. They do 30 or 40 tests to really uncover what your aptitudes are. I have not great aptitude for memorizing numbers or even doing math in my head, but I really excel at discussing numbers and really helping weave that into someone's life. So I think that there's, certain applications for math that when you're a young woman coming up in school, they're not really highlighted because there's so much repetitive, solve this equation, memorize these numbers. And so if you're memorizing numbers at a young age, by the time you reach high school or college, you have it in your head that you're just not good at math. And then finance sort of gets tethered in with math. So I just think we're sort of, we find other things by the time it's time to choose our career.
And I'm glad in your op-ed that you talked about just the differences, the way that men and women perceive money in your experience, in terms of the identity. You write, money is a tool for an emotional outcome in many of my conversations with women. And conversely, many discussions with my male clients are about achieving a financial target or goal. And you say that neither approach is better to others, but I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit about that, because it's really fascinating, what you wrote.
Yeah. So I now I'm generalizing. So there, we're talking about the bell curve. There are outliers where, I do have many clients that are men who are also very interested in the emotional outcome. And I have many clients that are women who also have a target in mind. But generally speaking, when we begin to unravel everything that goes into a full financial plan, there is a vision or an emotional outcome that women have. They want more time or energy. They're wanting enough money to have an experience. They want to travel more. They want to have a comfortable lifestyle, where men many times will outline, a number. Well, I want to have $1 million before I retire. It's just a very bottom line sort of target in mind. And so a lot of the reporting is about that bottom line target. If you want this amount of dollars, then you need to save this much. And so for women, I would say if they knew that 80% of the conversations I'm having with male clients are me trying to tether out what emotional outcome they actually want because they don't know how to voice it to me, I think more women would come into the financial planning meetings, right? Because they would know how to voice that for the family. But really what I do in many conversations with men is they will give me their target, and then I ask a lot of questions to make sure whether that target is really going to give them comfort and satisfaction. So I think it's important to have both types of thinking involved in family financial discussions, because I can tease that out of a more masculine presence in a conversation. But if there is a woman in the household who already knows what will bring comfort and satisfaction, it'd be awesome to have that in the conversation too.
I want to thank you so much for being my guest on today's episode of the Tennessee Voices podcast. Again, for the audience, this is Teresa J.W. Bailey, Senior Wealth Strategist and Director of Development at Waddell Associates. I want to thank you so much again, but before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests if they would leave our audience with some words of wisdom to help us get through this challenging time.
Oh, thank you, David. Words of wisdom to get through this challenging time would be to listen to your own intuition and believe it.
Thank you so much. May you stay well and healthy, and I'm grateful again for you coming on the show today.
Thank you, David.